finally, how do we generally improve the quality of localized structured content?
I think one of the recurring problems that we see is the overuse of functionality, for example, snippets and variables that are trying to over-engineer the content. So it's using sentence structures or linguistic rules that are rules in English that don't apply to other languages. Our best practice guideline would always be that snippets and variables would ideally only be things that shouldn't be translated in any language, a product name, for example, or a company name. Snippets should be at sentence level, ideally. Similarly with software engineering, when we have lots of different bits of a sentence that are then put together to form a full sentence, that isn't friendly for internationalization and localization, because different languages have different sentence structures and different grammatical rules. That can cause a problem in the quality of the translation, because translators are having to essentially bodge it to make it work in their language, and it's not how it would flow or how it would be written naturally. But if those tools are used well, if snippets and variables are used optimally as they should be, you're getting the maximum benefit from them whilst not compromising on the linguistic quality in other languages.
How do you measure or define quality in localized content?
Quality of any content is very subjective. People have different opinions on how content's been written, the style and tone, for example. So we'd always, again, look to put structures and rules in place for that, be it a glossary of key terminology or a style guide, so that we're able to build a corporate tone of voice and a corporate style rather than it being aligned with just one individual's requirements. So the linguists use those as reference, and that style and tone is personal preference, but of course the content should always be correct, and it should always convey the message that the original content is intended.
From a technical perspective, I might measure quality in terms of how many anomalies are picked up by our exception reporting tools, or how many times we have to go back and forth fixing issues that have been picked up, how many iterations you have to go through. And if we're getting to the point where we're doing updates on a frequent basis and they tend to go smoothly and there are no versioning issues that come up, then that for me is a pipeline that's running smoothly, and it's an indicator of good quality. We could talk about some of the tooling that's available out there. So XML Data is a standard that gets talked about a lot in the context of structured content. It's an open standard, and there are a number of open source and proprietary tools available for Data. They fall into three categories, more or less. So there are authoring tools for actually creating Data content. The Oxygen XML editor is the one that seems to be used the most out there. There are publishing engines. So once you have your Data content, which is just kind of plain XML, you need some kind of templating engine on top, which can produce output in HTML format, PDF format, or whatever is needed. Antenna House is one of the proprietary tools that's available out there. There are open source ones as well. And there do exist also Data content management systems, which are server products. So those would be for people who have a large quantity of content or a large number of authors working on it, and you need something that is going to maintain and manage that content over time. Data is perhaps quite a challenging solution to set up. You do need some technical expertise and development efforts to actually create your Data solution. And another tool which is used a lot is Madcap Flare, which we've mentioned, and this is a proprietary tool, but it's a one-stop shop. It provides both the authoring and the publishing capabilities. I don't think they have a server product, but a lot of people using Madcap Flare will manage their content inside a Git repository, and it has integration to allow for that. Data doesn't need as much expertise to get started with, But I think that it is still possible to fall into some traps with the kind of design setup of your Flare project. So it's always good to kind of get some technical expertise to try and stack the odds in favor of you having a nice, clean pipeline managing Flare content.
And what are some common traps that people fall into?
Overuse or over-architecting of content, excessive use of snippets, variables. This is something that we come across quite a lot. Or the way that you can set up let's say a product manual, and if you have 20 variants of your product, you can set up all kinds of rules and clever ways that you can automatically generate your 20 different manuals for your product. I think if this is not done in a nice, clean way, it can get very messy very quickly, and that is where we tend to see difficulty and problems creeping in.
And if people are looking for tools for like any of those steps, what should they be looking for in tools? And how can they find out which ones are going to be the right ones for them?
I think it really depends on your use case. So we have come across all kinds of different approaches here. One thing I would say, just in the context of localization, choose a tool which is set up for internationalization and localization. So you really want a platform where you're going to be able to create an English content set, and for that to be linked to a corresponding translated content set in another language. So you don't want to be maintaining these two things independently of each other. There ought to be some kind of data model which supports having an English version and a translated version, or multiple translated versions of a piece of content. So all good content management systems will generally have that kind of functionality built in. Madcap Flare manages this through an add-on product, which is called Lingo. And that is designed to kind of take your English content set and branch it into multiple language variations and kind of manage that whole process end to end. But we use Lingo as a piece of middleware in our pipeline. So we use it to kind of get the content out of Flare. It goes through our pipeline and it goes back through Lingo to create the translated versions of the Flare projects.
And what can people look for to make sure that the tools that they're looking at do have that localization capability? Because all of the different products I've noticed have completely different ways of talking about it sometimes.
Yeah, there are a lot of different strategies for managing localized versions of content. So in a content management system, you would hope to see, as an author, an editor, some language switcher or some options for saying, okay, flip and give me the French version of this piece of content. So if those kinds of things are showing up in the UI, then it's a good indication that that tool supports translation. I think what I do is, as a developer, is I'll look at the API documentation, and that will generally give me quite a good clue as to what sort of multilingual capabilities the platform has. But they are all slightly different, and different platforms do it in different ways. We have quite a lot of people using WordPress, increasingly now as a kind of headless CMS. And WordPress itself doesn't really have multilingual capability built in. It doesn't have a language switcher feature, but you can use a plugin called WPML, and there are a couple of other plugins as well. But WPML is the most common one we see, and we are seeing clients use that to manage their headless CMS structured content.